I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a look at the powerful new memoir. It is called Hail and Farewell, a Vietnam Era Memoir by Frank Jodaitis. It is a powerful book that takes readers on a deeply personal journey through the Vietnam War era, highlighting the social and political upheaval of the time. We will explore his heartfelt story of a soldier's trials, triumphs, and transformative experiences. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Frank, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Very good to be with you.
What inspired you to share your personal and emotional journey through the Vietnam era?
Well, it was a unique period of time. I had people that had asked me what happened to me in Vietnam, particularly guys I went to college with. And my period when we were withdrawing from Vietnam was significantly different than what happened in Afghanistan. And I felt that all the different changes after the assassination of Kennedy, I wanted to leave it for posterity. My college went co-ed. It's absolutely nothing like it was when I went there. And so I felt it would be good to do this for just to document it.
Yeah. Yeah, life changed dramatically before and after Vietnam. Tell us a little bit about your service. How old were you? Were you in college already? Were you planning to go to college? What year was it? Tell us a little bit about that experience. It was a shock to a lot of people, I know, when their number came up and they had to go get pulled out of their comfortable homes here in America and get sent to a land they hardly had even had heard of before, you know?
I was 18 years old when I went to college in 1963. I was a freshman at an engineering school, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And we were all required to go through the ROTC for 2 years. And then at the end of 2 years, you chose either to stay in or to try to get a college deferment for defense work or go to grad school or whatever. So I chose to take the advanced course. And at the end of my junior year, I finished my junior year, but I had to leave school because of my academics weren't that good. So I almost got drafted. I went to work for a retired Army colonel up in New Hampshire. And he had a fantastic experience during the Second World War. So my relationship with him was something I really needed at that time in my life. And I went back to college and I finished my degree and worked for about 4 or 5 months. And then I had to go into training for the ROTC, what they called summer camp, after which I was commissioned. And then I went to the engineer school. After the engineer school, I went to the 83rd Construction Battalion in Kansas, which was based, it was under the European Command. And after I did, in July, I left there to go to Vietnam. And I went to Vietnam the weekend of Woodstock. And
that's a juxtaposition, huh?
It's a milestone like the Kennedy assassination. Everybody kind of remembers when Woodstock happened.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was put on a staff, and because of the withdrawal, the projects I was supposed to work on were defunded about 2 weeks after I got there. And so I had to stay there for a while and do little odd jobs or whatever, and because my colonel didn't want to give up the number of people he had on his staff. So I got very involved in reading Time Magazine, Newsweek, and got really into the moratoriums and all that. And I was getting mail from people back home and proudly telling me how they demonstrated, and I was the opposite end of the scale. And so this is the beginning of the adjustment process. And right after New Year's, I was sent over to the Naval Hospital, and we were bringing in all these wounded Marines, about 25 of them. They just did chest wounds there with another fellow. And I guess they decided that I was up to speed with a little bit of carnage. So they transferred me up north and put me on another staff job. And after, with ROTC guys, usually you did 6 months on a staff, and then they put you with the troops. With the OCS people, I went right with the troops. So they put me out on a perimeter. I was on a perimeter for about 6 weeks. And they asked me if I wanted to take another job. And I jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. And went up to Camp Evans, which was a base camp for the 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne. And there was a company called the 555th Maintenance Company. It was a composite. They did everything from making ice cream to fixing artillery pieces. And they had a lot of these fellows. This is the first time I really started, because in headquarters, you didn't run into what they call Category 4 troops that were called from McNamara's 100,000. Every year, 100,000 troops that couldn't pass the normal test were put in the military, or they were felons or whatever, and so we had our contingent, and the unit was supposed to be deactivated in early July. And when they were reassigning people, one fellow felt that he was being picked on because of his race. He got out of hand, and we ended up with a racially motivated murder. And shortly after that, my company commander left, and I ended up as the guy that was left with closing the unit out. So after I closed the unit out, I was shipped up to the 57th Transportation Company, which was the other end of the spectrum. Everybody there was on the ball. And I only lasted 6 convoys. I was in a truck crash and ended up getting medevaced. And I was allowed to kind of be ambulatory. So I went on leave, went to Japan, came home, and then basically left. But it kind of slipped my mind. In the truck company, I looked it up on the wall in DC. And for every driver we had, or crew member on the trucks, who was killed in action, they had one killed in crashes.
Amazing.
So, we went to places you wouldn't believe a truck could go.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I went home, and I ended up having to go in the reserve system. They put me in a chemical warfare company. I didn't want to be in a chemical warfare company. I had an uncle that was involved. I can never really document it. He was involved in research on the bomb.
Yeah.
And died of Hodgkin's disease in 1952. But anyway, so I transferred into a combat engineer, National Guard outfit. I had known these people, some of them when I worked after I got out of college. I finished my time there, and I got out of the Army when Nixon resigned from the presidency. So in a nutshell, that's sort of the story, but there's
quite a journey. It's a lot different than your experience, of course, when you were back in the States. Writing this book now, decades later, what do you hope readers take away from it?
I think that they take away from it that most people know about all the combat and everything else, but they don't know about the psychological warfare that was involved with us that were not fully in combat, were in the country. Some of these people that were in the units where we had a lot of trouble, I didn't realize what they were doing till I read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And they pretty much went by the book in their tactics. So we had one individual that looked like a super trooper and everything else, but he was fomenting everything in the background.
Yeah.
And he was with the fellow that committed the murder.
Yeah.
He ended up in prison for 40 years.
Amazing. When you came back to the States finally, how were you greeted?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wrote about my R&R in Australia. Because when I went to Australia, so I went to Sydney, and everybody treated me like hometown kid that was coming home from the war, buying me drinks and taking me places and stuff. But when I came home, aside of my neighbors in the neighborhood, and one of the neighborhood fellows, it's in the book, he was killed in Vietnam before I went over. But he had come home on leave, he was a Marine. And so I got to get a little bit of idea what he was with. He had a massive case of post-traumatic stress when he came home. And my father said they never should have sent him back. They did. And he almost made it through to Christmas, but he didn't.
Yeah.
So that, and even the veterans that they asked us to join the VFW, and then they told us that all us Vietnam boys should form our own post because they didn't have enough room for us. But the disabled American veterans were pretty good to me. So I ended up joining the Vietnam Veterans of America.
Yeah.
But I've since joined all the rest of the life members. That's sort of the homecoming. But the homecoming I was engaged when I left Vietnam, before Vietnam, but I wasn't engaged when I came home.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of that. And we had when I was on the perimeter around the time of the murder, so one of the fellows on the perimeter, he got a letter like that, and he went and told he was a sergeant, he told the fellows to get out of the bunker, and he laid down on a grenade and killed himself. So we saw a lot of that. There's suicides and that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say they're happening every day, but it's
it was a difficult era for sure. The war was very unpopular, particularly towards the end here in the United States. A lot of protests, like you said, you were sent away or you were called up right around the time of Woodstock. And I don't think there's a greater juxtaposition between the hippie culture and the men who were sent overseas to fight for their country. In many cases, they didn't want to go, but they had to go. This was your duty at the time. And you also don't choose your battles. You do what the higher ups say. So it was a conflicted time for many Americans, including the soldiers who were serving overseas, for sure. Frank Jodaitis has written a wonderful book about the Vietnam era. It is called Hail and Farewell, a Vietnam Era Memoir. It tracks his own personal story through the Vietnam War era, and it highlights the social and political upheaval of the time. Lots of men like him were taken basically as boys, put into unbelievable circumstances, and then sent home to anything but, unfortunately, a hero's welcome. Frank, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.